Good morning, everyone, and welcome. If you're able to stand, let's read just a few verses of Scripture, and then we'll sing one song, and then we'll kick it off. Ephesians 6:10-13. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God, so that you will be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. Let's sing your name. Today, we would continue on this note that we've started in the fall. We'd learn, we'd continue to be in fire for you. Thank you for Thomas and Thomas who have joined us today, and thank you for the opportunity to do this. We pray that you would be glorified in all this. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. Anthony.
Grace and peace to you. It's good to be together this morning and to worship and have fellowship. I'd like to introduce Thomas McCuddy for those who weren't here last time. He's interim pastor at Cape Fear Baptist Church, and he's also the director of the Norm Giesler Institute, and he's also the professor of apologetics at Carolina College of Biblical Studies, where Thomas is a student. And where I go to school at Southern Evangelical Seminary, where I'm doing my grad work, I plan to graduate next year, and Lord willing, we'll both graduate together, except he'll have his doctorate. So without any further ado, my friend, let's hear it today.
We're going to be talking about sour notes today. So it is good to be back. Some of you I remember, some of you I can never forget. I'm not going to let you know which one is which, but it is very good to be back here. And I know it sounds a little strange. We talk about Thomas and Thomas. This is my student Thomas, and I know it sounds like a law firm whenever we go somewhere. And I was like, so we'll just play with that. But Really, what our goal is for this weekend today is that back in the fall, as was mentioned, if you weren't here, this is where David Giesler and I came out and we began the process of what conversational evangelism is. And part of what we've done is, if you missed it last November, but even if you did come, we've got these sheets at the back, and these are going to be available if you didn't get one. This is all of conversational evangelism on one page. Sometimes people look at this and they say, do you have a large print version? The answer is yes. We can get large print versions to you. This is the one that fits all on one page. And on the back are the 12 points that show Christianity's true, that this is a whole summary of the 12 points that you would find in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, which is what we have down on our table downstairs. We give these out to people because it just kind of shows the big picture. And really what I've been doing down in Fayetteville, so this is kind of what I learned is when we go in and we do conversational evangelism, there's a church in Fayetteville, and I go there every other month kind of following up, training the church. And so this is our first follow-up here, where after learning about evangelism, and we should share, what happens when you try to share about Christ is you get a lot of questions. You get a lot of people who have concerns or confusions. And so we try to help the church members, and with today, the sour note is reference to part of what we learned in the conversational evangelism process, that if you're here before, again, to kind of bring you up to speed, this is all you really need to know is that there's 4 roles that we play when it comes to evangelism. The first role is we play the role of the musician, and that's the one that hears the sour notes. This is a place we have to start with unbelievers, because so often in Christianity we might answer questions they don't have. Or we might assume certain things when that's not, they might be using, we might be using the same terms but a different dictionary. So we need to have the kind of conversations where we can listen and we can hear what's going on. My son, who I really wanted to bring with me, but Monday is his last day. We homeschool, and it's his last experience with his co-op, and so we're going to be traveling back on Monday. So he didn't get to come. He's 8 years old, and he's learning to play guitar. And so the other day he's learned some basic chords, and I can't remember the song that he was trying to play because I think I figured it out what he was playing, but it wasn't entirely clear what he was playing. It was the first time he was working on it. I know he's been working on Surfing USA, and I know he's been working on You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. So those he's really good at. That when he gets it, you can hear it. It's clear. It rings out. So he began a new song, and I'm like, that's like. And then one time when he was playing, I was listening to it, and in our home we have our playroom, our schoolroom, and my office is all kind of combined in this one big bonus room. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, "Are you doing that right? Like, I don't know how to play guitar, but I'm just like, are you doing this right? This doesn't sound quite right." "No, Daddy, I'm doing it right." "I'm paying to teach you how to do this?" Like, something is not sounding right to my ear. But the problem is, I didn't have a way to correct him because I don't know how to play guitar. I can hear it. I can hear that sour note, but I can't fix it. So part of what we want to be able to do is when we hear those sour notes from non-believing friends, from family members, we want to be able to offer, whether it's the information they're missing, whether it's the misunderstanding that needs correcting, whatever it is, we want to be able to, as my wife can do that. My wife understands music. My wife plays piano. She understands how to read music. My mom actually plays piano. I have 3 brothers who actually 2 of them were in military band, and one played in band in high school. And I sit back there and I tell people, and I think I mentioned this last time, I said, if you've watched the movie and they say, whenever a bell rings, an angel gets its wings, whenever I sing, God takes them away. So I don't sing and I don't understand music. But my wife is able to go in and say, "Oh no, here's what you're doing wrong. Here's how you're holding your hand. Here's just little things." And when she does that, I was like, that sounds so much better. Like, I feel like my soul is hurting, like listening to these, because again, it's just, But I think the same thing, we should react kind of the same way when our non-believing friends are saying the things that we know are not true. We know that's not the way it is. And it should hurt us in our heart and motivate us to engage and be able to correct those misunderstandings, because that's how they're going to be able to take one step closer to the cross. That I understand how if they have a misconception about Jesus and they think that Jesus is a cosmic bully, well, who wants to worship? Who wants to put their faith in a cosmic bully? Correct? You with me this morning? Okay, we had coffee earlier, so you should be good. And actually, as we do this, I'm going to let you know, we're going to go till about 11 o'clock. We're going to take a break. I'm going to let you get up and move around, get the blood flowing again, and we're going to come back to this. But our goal this morning is to hear those sour notes and offer ways to build bridges to correct those things. So that's the main idea. As we continue on in the process, the role of the artist is to illuminate. That after hearing someone else's beliefs, being able to state those back to them clearly, so that way, number one, they know that you understand where they're coming from, because everybody wants to be understood, right? None of you enjoy it when you say something and somebody completely misunderstands what you say. If you're married, you know what that's like. Amen? Amen. Happens all the time. That is not what I meant. If you have children, you tell them, like, you need to go eat dinner. And you go in there and there's just cookie crumbs everywhere. What are you doing? I ate dinner. You're not supposed to eat cookies. Well, we do eat cookies at dinner time. You know, and again, it's like, do you hear what you're saying? Like, that's not what's dinner. You're saying cookies are dinner. When has cookies ever been dinner? And like, you know, and what happens is they often say, well, when you say it, it doesn't sound as good. It always sounds better in your own head. So we're going to be the artist to illuminate. The role of the archaeologist is to uncover. This third role is to uncover the genuine barrier that's between them and Christ. So that's why we need to listen for these sour notes to figure out what's really going on. Actually, since I last came, the Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door back early January. I remember because I still had my Christmas tree up, and they would not come into my house because my Christmas tree was right there in front of my door. They come in, and they come up to my door, and they just talk to me for about 5 minutes, ask me a question: how do I cope with life? How do I cope with the bad things that happen? They say, can we come back next week and talk about that some more? Sure. Now, what was great about this was the best thing ever was I'm doing a book club at my house, and on that particular Saturday morning, we were beginning conversational evangelism. Like, that was what everybody was sitting. I had like 6 people in my living room, all with conversational evangelism books. We're about to get started. They said, you got people coming up your driveway. And I look, and I was like, it's Jehovah's Witnesses. And of course, these 6 people are like, you know, they put their books away, and they're like, let's see it. Let's see it in action. And so they came in, they came up, and I talked to them, and again, they were just asking me, engage with me. They said, can we come back? Sure, come on back. So they come back the next week, 5 more minutes, ask me some more questions. They come back the next week, same kind of thing, talking about some scriptures. And then they show me, they pull out an iPad, and they talk about their Bible studies that they do. And I was like, can you do one of those with me? Can you do a Bible study with me? And they said, sure. Now, the next question people ask is, do they know what you do for a living? And I always ask people, do you hand people a resume when they come to your front door? I don't either, okay? So I don't have to tell them my entire work history. They've not asked, and it just hasn't come up. So, but they've been doing a Bible study in my house, and when it comes to surfacing those barriers, uncovering those genuine barriers, as we began, and they gave me a little book, How to Know What the Bible Really Says, and I was just using their book, and I just asked questions. That's all I do. I'm playing the role of the musician with them. And what's the biggest barrier between Jehovah's Witnesses and the gospel? I asked this of my class one time, and people start throwing out the doctrine of God, the deity of Jesus, and all these different doctrines. And I said the biggest initial barrier is the watchtower. What they believe is the mouthpiece of God on earth. And in this little book, I tested that. I looked at the book, and it said, God does not ever cause war. So we go back to the Old Testament where God sent Israel into war, right? So we had an hour-long conversation, and my whole goal was just to get them to recognize that God sent Israel to war. They know that, but they will not say it. We ran around that for an hour. Who gave the marching orders? Canaan deserved it. But who sent them? Well, they had time to repent. Yeah, but who sent Israel? Well, it was their land anyway. Literally for an hour, they would not say the words that God sent Israel to war because that would contradict their book and cast doubt upon the watchtower. They're coming back on the 13th. We're still working on that. It's a long game. There's 14 chapters in that book. We've made it a chapter and a half. So all I do is ask questions and hear those sour notes. Because when I asked about war, they came back and they said, well, do you believe God calls the war in Iraq? And immediately I said, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what happened in Scripture. Keep bringing them back. Keep it focused. So, the last is the role of the builder, where we take the truth they have and build bridges back to the gospel. And that's kind of the end game at the point where we've eliminated these sour notes. We've come to these common understandings. That's kind of what we do at the end. So our focus right now for today is really just on that role of the musician. And what we do is we talked about last time, there's really 4 sour notes that we hear. And this is what we're going to spend all our time this morning talking about. And if you want the PowerPoints, we have an email sign up downstairs. If you put your email down there, I will email you all these PowerPoints. You can have them, and they'll even be pretty in color and all that if you want. So, and I'll also, if you want a large print edition of one of these, make sure to note that next to your name. Okay. So 4 types of sour notes. The first is belief versus heart longing. In other words, they claim they believe something, but they want something else. So this is when you're listening and you hear they say this is what they believe, but that goes against our human nature, our human condition, or something. They seem to want something, even though they make this claim. The second type of sour note is belief versus behavior. This is where they claim they believe one thing, but they act another way. And so this is what we often refer to this as hypocrisy. You say you believe this, but you do this other thing. So we need to listen for what they say they believe and watch what they do. Belief versus belief is where they just hold 2 ideas that contradict each other. I tell my students at the Bible college all the time that sometimes we may not know what's true, but when we hold 2 ideas that contradict, we know that we have something that's false. When there's a contradiction, you cannot have truth. You may not know what the exact truth is, but when you hold 2 ideas that contradict each other, you automatically have a problem. You know something has gone wrong. That's it's kind of like when I was in high school, and I'm a pretty good speller. It's just the vowels and consonants that get me most of the time. So when I was writing my essays, I had this problem where I didn't know how to spell words. And you're writing these essays in class. So I had this really neat idea. I'm just going to spell it different ways every time, and one of them will be right. But what does that do to all the other times I used it? It's wrong. Assuming I actually got the right spelling in my various efforts, which was not always the case. So that's why with Microsoft Word, with the automatic spell check, that was for me. That's not for anybody else. That stuff is for me. The illogical belief is the last sour notes. Beliefs that by themselves are just incoherent, self-defeating. They don't make any sense. And that you can say things kind of like, if we wanted to talk about a square circle, you can say that. You can say square circle, but that doesn't make any sense because, and I have a math degree. My undergrad is in math. So anytime you take a square and you start to bend that in any way, it ceases to be a square. And then you take a circle and you change that in any way, it's not a circle. Okay? So a squared circle is not in any literal way true. I had a guy in Michigan though, he's like, well, what's that thing that boxers fight in? It's a ring, right? And what shape is it? It's square. I said, that's a figurative use of the squared circle, not a literal use. He's like, semantics. I was like, words mean things. That's what they do. He's like, okay. So it just, again, you hear these sourdoughs, you work with them. And so what we're going to do is we're going to focus for the first part on these first 2. And right now we're going to look at belief versus heart longing. And again, this is where people say something. They say they believe something, but again, there's some sort of desire that's there, or maybe it's even built into our nature that you realize that's just not the way it is. It's my dad claims this of me when I eat sushi. I don't know if any of you are sushi eaters. Anybody sushi eaters? Okay, people of God have raised their hands. So the sushi, I love the sushi, but my dad tells me that he's like, son, that's not natural. That's fish bait. But I know why the fish eat it. It's yummy, right? So he sees this, I say I like sushi, but again, he says, doesn't your heart long for something like steak? And of course, if you were here last time, I love steak, but I like my steak medium rare. So, we're moving to the sushi side again. So it's like my dad, he's like, oh. So what we want to do is we want to understand the issues of belief in relation to that heart longing. So the way this looks, a person's worldview, the religion or the philosophy contain beliefs that are inconsistent with the human heart. When you're talking to somebody, you might find these ideas. You might find these things that goes against who we are. If you know anybody who tends to take more of an ascetic lifestyle, and they're like, well, I'm going to cast off food, you recognize that's a normal, good desire. Do you really believe food is bad? Because we're kind of made to be eating creatures, So that's that desire that runs contrary to the beliefs. So a good quote is, what oxygen is to the brain, Jesus is to the heart. And I think that we are made to be worshipers of God. This is who we are. And I think what we see in our world is when we see a world that has abandoned God and turned away from Christ, they've got to fill that with something and it just doesn't work. So this is a sour note that we will often hear from people. So we're going to cover 3 particular notes in terms of the heart longings. First is YOLO. You familiar with that? You only live once. Okay, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the phrase don't judge. And we're going to talk about working for salvation. So the first note, the YOLO, and this is the popular version of the eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. That I see this on the internet all the time. I hear this. I served 15 years as a youth pastor. So I remember when these ideas were manifesting and people were saying these things, and that's what they believe. You only live once. And this is just Epicureanism warmed over. This is an old idea. And you're like, well, where have you heard of Epicurus before? If you look on Acts 17, when Paul goes up to Mars Hill, he's told that there were the Epicureans and the Stoics. Because the Epicureans were eat, drink, and be merry. The Stoics, the way we use Stoicism today, calm, composed, no real desires. I mean, that's your extreme views that were up there at Mars Hill. And this heart longing is that there's a growing trend in the YOLOP. That's the you only live once people. So the YOLOPs are saying that this doesn't mean the hedonism. It doesn't mean just go after all your desires, but it means dedicating your life to something that matters. But the problem with this is that if you only live once, then nothing really matters. This is what we're seeing, is that they say you only live once. You gotta make the most. That's it. But then on the other side, they're desiring for something that will live beyond them, some sort of meaning and purpose. And these ideas come into conflict, that you cannot live as if today is only what matters when your heart longs for something beyond today. And I'm seeing this in the internet. I'm seeing this on people's Facebook pages. I'm hearing these sour notes. People are singing this, trying to say, today's all we have. We better plan for tomorrow. I'm like, do you hear? It's like twang. When my son hits that note, and you're, do you hear what you're saying? I don't believe people are. I don't believe they do. They're not hearing this disconnect. So part of what we do in evangelism is we try to help them, and we use whatever means, like when they say nothing really matters, well, we write songs about that, right? Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody. Some of you are familiar, some of you are children of the 80s and the 80s music. You know what I'm talking about, right? I see a couple heads, okay. Well, Bohemian Rhapsody is a song that the whole point of it, when people ask, what's the meaning of Bohemian Rhapsody? And the point is there is none. That's the joke. That's why when he starts going through those random lyrics, nothing really matters. So it doesn't matter what you sing about, whether you sing about Figaro or whatever, it just throws random words in there. And yet, isn't it odd how so many people who claim nothing really matters spend a lot of time and energy trying to, it matters to them to tell us that nothing really matters. Have you noticed? There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time doing this. And so when we hear this, part of what we need to do is build bridges. So the whole idea with this idea is we can ask the kind of questions like, have you ever wondered if the people who were responsible for 9/11 will ever come to justice, specifically the people who flew into the World Trade Center? Now, the reason we ask these kinds of questions is because they think about it and like, well, if YOLO is true, you only live once, make the most of what you have today because tomorrow doesn't matter, then those who flew into the World Trade Center, they got exactly what they wanted, and they will never be held accountable. And you ask, why should you do such horrible things to other people, whether it's flying planes in the buildings or whether it's just using up, maybe I have a brother who early in his life, he tended to be very taking from everybody. Why not if this is the only life? So we're asked the kind of questions, and there's something in our heart that says, that's not the way we ought to live. That's not a good life. That's not the way things should be. And even for those who have done such terrible things, and again, if they are now passed away, how will they ever be brought to justice? Because the Scripture lets us know this is not our only life, and we will be held accountable. And there's something even in our heart that says that for those who have lived terrible lives, for those who have done terrible things, that there needs to be a day of reckoning. There needs to be. It's in our hearts. Even if it's not in our beliefs, it's in our hearts. Like, how can they get away with it? Because that's exactly what happens if this is our only life. Actually, I ask another question. You know what in the action movies, when the bad guy gets it in the end, seems kind of hollow, doesn't it? I want you to think about this, because I'm an avid movie watcher. I think last time I was here, I gave a lot of movie references, and I still can. So I've watched more movies since I last came. I have new movies now in my repertoire. But when you watch the movies, and I remember watching a particular movie, and it was one of the setup was the bad guy killed a guy's family, so the whole movie is about going after the bad guy and getting the vengeance. And at the end of the movie, it's the big fight scene, right? The one we've been waiting for. And we get to watch all the cool fight scenes and all the struggle, and the good guy, he's almost about to die. You know he's not going to, and you know in the end, he overcomes. But he had a friend with him, and the friend looks over at him, and he says, "Do you feel better?" He's standing over the broken body of his enemy. "You feel better?" Guy says, "Not really. Let's go." How true is that? That is a real life experience. That at the end of the day, again, you've achieved all those things. The bad guy is vanquished. But yet you realize if this is all there is, and in the case of this movie, his family's gone, nothing is returned. Nothing will ever be received. Nothing will ever come from this. All he's done is he's got his vengeance, and it's empty. The feeling in the heart is empty. So this is why when we talk with our non-believing friends, we need to hear these kinds of things. We need to hear that, they try to justify, and this is what it usually is. They're trying to justify their lives the way it is, but we understand that goes against the way we're designed as creatures. So that's the first sour note. Second sour note. Don't judge. This is the belief that right and wrong are the opinions of people. In other words, people say, who am I to judge, or who are you to judge? That we shouldn't do any judging whatsoever. But the heart longing is that some things just feel wrong. Now again, we can approach this from different angles, but one of the ways I handle this, when people say you shouldn't judge, there are things in this life that just feel wrong. And what happens is we have to spend a lot of time, usually in higher education, to sear those feelings so that way we can receive those things that are wrong as not wrong. There's a huge push in our culture to do that. There's a huge push to normalize the things that just simply aren't good that aren't right, and we have to keep telling ourselves that this is good. For example, I was joking because Thomas, this is the Thomas who runs, okay? I run errands, he runs away. So when people run, and I did try some running one time, and the whole time I'm telling myself, this is supposed to be fun. People told me this is fun. And I'm like, no, this is not fun. Now, you might like the effects of running, but you cannot convince me that people who, when they exercise, like the actual exercise. That's a lie. You're all liars if you do that. No, you like the results that come from it. That's something entirely different. So there's just some things, again, I'm like, I can't make myself like this. I can't feel good from this. And when I get done, I feel terrible. So I'm just like, that's physical feelings. Okay, and so in our culture, we have these things. And again, even as I was, as we were driving up, again, I'm down south in North Carolina. And as I'm coming north, we come in and going, New York has been in the news quite a bit. That are there not some things that we're just looking at and we're like, can't you see, does this not feel wrong? Does this not, even if you tell yourself all these other things, doesn't it feel wrong? Isn't there a heart longing? So when we do this, we've got to get some sort of context. And again, I like math, so let me give you another example. I like math. I told you that I like math. Do we still have math lovers here? Any of you like mathematics? A few hands. All right, again. That's, it's okay. So math, I enjoy math. I like it. It's good. I also like tacos. Okay? I eat anything. Like that was the joke. Like being like with the Millers and having Thomas, and they all have like dietary restrictions. They look at me and they're like, well, what could you eat? I was like, I could eat a handful of dirt and it wouldn't hurt me. I was like, so, don't worry about me. Y'all do what you got to do. Okay? So I like math. I like tacos. I like American Ninja Warrior. You ever watch American Ninja Warrior? It's good stuff. My 8-year-old. We love it. But here's the thing. I am not distraught when people take opposing views to these things. That for all of you that are math haters, you don't ruin my day. You don't bother me one bit. If you don't like tacos, you're the one missing out. That's your problem. I feel sorry for you. Don't like American Ninja Warrior? Oh, come on. It's American and it's ninja. What more could you want? And it's warriors. It's like, oh. But there's some things that do upset me. Because I believe racism is wrong. And if somebody proclaims racism is good, there's something that stirs within me that this ought not be the case. I was just sharing, I don't know if I shared this last time, but I was talking downstairs. The church that I pastor at, Cape Fear Baptist Church, and some of you are thinking like the movie Cape Fear. Yep, same Cape Fear River. Okay, so it's built on the Cape Fear River. Church was established 1756. The sanctuary was built in 1858. Sherman used it on his march to the sea as he was going through the Fayetteville area as a makeshift hospital. The sanctuary has never been remodeled, which means we still have slave seating in our sanctuary. We still have the places. And actually, if you take down the ceiling tiles, the slaves wrote their names in the boards up at top. And we still have that in our sanctuary. And it's a reminder of days in the past where there was just some things that should just feel wrong, but yet we as a society closed our eyes to it. And we had to have people come along and wake us up and hear what we were saying, that owning another human being, you have to tell someone else owning another human being is wrong. But that was not that long ago. And we're still in a day when we hear that some of these things, if they disagree, racism is wrong, we should feel in our hearts something going on. Babies shouldn't be tortured. That you should not torture babies. That if you're going to torture babies, that it should stir in our hearts that this is wrong. Yet what happens as since the last time I was here. At the Bible college I teach at, I teach an ethics class, and one of my students, I had an assignment, and the title of the assignment was, "When is it right to kill a baby?" And it was a thinking experiment where they go off to the internet and find an argument for infanticide, and they have to refute it. Like any argument, just go out there and see what kind of stuff is out there. She came across Peter Singer's work, which if you're familiar with him, he's out in this area, I believe, somewhere near here. And so he advocates, I think, 2 years, that you can kill a child up to 2 years after it's been born, but he says most people won't go that way, so he says 30 days seems good. And my student agreed with Peter Singer. She's a pastor of a church. She agreed that you can kill a child up to 30 days after it's been born. And I said to myself, do you hear what you're saying? In her paper, she justified it. If it's the loving thing to do, then obviously that's what you would do, right? And I asked myself, when is it ever, and so that's why I changed the assignment, and I said, when is it right to lovingly kill a child? I had to throw that in there because that was, if it's loving to kill your child, then you can do it. I had to take a walk. I was grading papers. I had to take a walk around the college because my heart hurt. I was like, how have we seared our conscience to the point we don't feel something when we say that? So we have to bring these things out. Theft should be prosecuted. That again, if people saying, we shouldn't prosecute theft, we shouldn't, and this was on a CNN, I think it was CNN or it was a local news station. There was a guy who broke into a lady's house and she ends up shooting him, so probably someplace down south. So she shoots him, he's taken off to the hospital and his friends are outside, the news reporter's talking to the friends, and the friends say, this is ridiculous. How's a guy supposed to get money for his shoes? How are we supposed to get money for our clothes if we don't get to break into people's houses? This was on a news report, a live news report. Do we not hear these sour notes? Are these preferences? Do I have grounds to judge? See, the heart aches at injustice. And so this is one of the ways when people talk about injustice, that's such a great thing to hear from people. When anyone talks about injustice, whether it's real or perceived, because there is no injustice without a standard of justice, and that would be God. And there's something in our heart that even when we believe it's injustice, do we not cry out for justice? Third note, working for salvation. This is what I call our Catholic connection because, again, in the Catholic Church, that's a really big thing. Thomas and I were down in Charleston, and I got a copy of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, big, thick copy. It was Dollar Day. I got it for $1. I was so excited, Not that I'm just at a used bookstore, but it was anything under $5 was just $1. That's magic math. It's $5, but now it's $1. Woo! So, and I got a copy, and I just flip and open it right there, and it says, salvation is by the works of the law. The 10 Commandments are still in force today. So salvation is by grace through faith and the keeping of the 10 Commandments and baptism. Right there in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. In other words, you want to be saved? That's your formula right there. If you're not keeping the 10 Commandments, you're not saved. If you're not baptized, you're not saved. So when it comes to working for salvation, the belief is I must earn my salvation. Somebody says I'm a good person or I have to do good things. But the heart longing is we know deep down inside this isn't enough and we long to be free. So what I do, and the way I handle this, when people, they say, well, I've got to earn my salvation, and I hear that, now, I got to work for it, you got to be good, you have to obey. So I ask the question, I like to ask this question. Now, there was one time I faced a very angry congregation, which is why this is the way it is, okay? So I asked the question, when is enough enough? When have you done enough good? Sometimes pastors, they wonder, pastors get we're not doing enough. And so the pastor asks, well, what do you mean by enough? What is enough for a pastor to do good? What is enough for you to do? What's enough as a parent? If you have children, when have you done enough? What does that word mean? Well, I asked this to a group one time in church, and they didn't have an answer. Well, here's my answer. I said, a pastor, and they were asking about, with visitation, a pastor has visited and done enough when the people are happy. And they said, okay, that makes sense. When we apply this to salvation, we have to do enough. We have to do enough good to be saved, right? How much good do you have to do in order for God to be happy with your performance? This is an easy answer. How much good do you have to do in order to do enough for God to be happy with your performance? Who wants to try? How much good is required to do enough so that God is pleased with your performance? What do you say? Do what? Zero. Because all the good you could do is not enough. I compared it, I use it this way when I preach. I say it's kind of like, we owe God a debt, and our only means of payment is a credit card. You ever try to pay a credit card using a credit card? Now, I've had some savvy millennials who've done this to me. They're like, well, you can do a balance transfer. Yeah, for 3%. If you get better than 3%, I want to know what credit card you're using. Because I'm familiar with the balance transfer. Yeah, that means you don't have to make your payment that month, but you just added 3% on your debt. And you still got a bill coming due next month. You're going to balance transfer again for another 3%? You'll go into debt a lot faster that way. You can't pay a credit card with a credit card. When it comes to working for salvation and doing good, you already owe that to God anyway. There is no enough when it comes to salvation, and that's the mindset. We know this, pastors, parents, social workers, bus drivers. When have you driven enough? When have you done your job enough? And again, there are boundaries for that, but in God's goodness, it's infinite. And that's why if we try to earn our salvation, try to keep the works of the law, the grand trick is you can't keep the works of the law perfectly. And so I think that many people just, I'm basically a good person. Isn't that enough? And I said, is that like basically keeping my kids alive? I got an 8, I got a 4, and I got an 18-month-old. And I basically keep them alive. I basically keep them safe. I basically love my wife. I basically pay my bills. Again, what do we want to? You're like, that's not going to be a very good life. Like something's going to derail really fast. But we're going to come to an infinite holy God, and we're going to say, I'm basically good, and that's my basis for salvation. And what we want to do is want people to hear that. We want them to hear what they're saying. So that's a belief versus heart longing. Second thing we're going to look at is belief versus behavior. Now, as we go through these, and as you're taking notes, you're looking at it, you might be having some questions. I know that Sunday night, we're going to be having like a question and answer time. I think we've devoted kind of the whole time to really just a dialogue between us, okay? So I'm encouraging you that if you're kind of getting these ideas, or you go home, you process it, and maybe like tomorrow morning when you're getting your shower ready for church and all those questions start coming to your mind, because that's what happens to me in the shower. So all those big thoughts of the universe come to your mind, collect those down, and then Sunday night we're going to talk about those. We're going to address those all together, okay? So the belief versus behavior. So understanding this issue, what we've got is people disconnect what they say they believe is true or good and the way they act. And most of us are familiar with this because you've done that at some point. We're very, very familiar with this, and we know we do it. Okay, just like when we know that something's wrong, but we do it anyway, and we try to justify it somehow. We're all guilty of this. Actions speak louder than words, but words are no less silent. So when we say we believe something, we say this, we want to be able to make those connections for people and say, do you understand what you're doing? So there's 3 things we're going to look at with this one, behavioral issues. First is that integrity is important, and this is our Catholic connection. The just say no to indoctrination. We're going to talk a little bit about the way Christians get accused of this. And forgive everyone with exceptions. I hope you're catching the way I phrase these. You look at that. Forgive everyone with exceptions. So integrity is important. This is what it looks like. The belief we should live lives of integrity and be good people. And most people will say this. They define it different ways, but they said, we should be good people. Like there's no one, I don't know anyone out there who genuinely says that we should be bad people. And the grand trick, the grand switch with that is that if they say that we should be bad people, then they believe being bad is good, so they're actually saying we should be good, and the way that we're good is by being bad. We're recording everything, so you can actually go back and play that in slow motion, but it's legit. It adds up, okay? Even in the movies, even the bad guys, what they're doing they believe is good. Have you ever seen the movie Payback with Mel Gibson? It's one in the movie cover. I remember it said the bad guy that you can root for, because he plays a thug. He steals some money, and some other thugs steal some money from him. The anti-heroes, yes. So, and again, Mel Gibson started moving in that direction, which I now like. Deadpool would be your anti-superhero, but we're not going to go there. So he stole some money. Mel Gibson stole some money, and then some thugs stole the money from him. So all he wanted was the money that he deserved, which is the money he originally stole. That's the whole premise of the movie. Okay, he's trying to get back. He just wants his money back, the one he stole fair and square. Okay, get it? You're just like. Do you not hear what's going on? And you don't as you watch the movie. And you root for him. You hope he wins in the end. You hope the bad guy sticks it to the other bad guys, because the bad guy, you want him to win. And the whole time I'm thinking about, what about the poor jewelry store owner? You know, like, anyway. But we should live lives of integrity, be good people, but behavior is speeding, fibbing, cheating, yelling, cussing, all the things that we do, that even though we say we should be good people, but then we justify or we go ahead and do these other things. I got busted on this last weekend. So last weekend I was at a homeschool conference down in Nashville. I was at the Opryland Hotel, basically where they bleed country music. Okay. So if you've ever go to Nashville, Opryland is a place to see. The hotel, it's an indoor jungle. There's a little river that actually goes through the middle of the hotel. You can take a little boat ride through it, and they created an old Delta, Mississippi village in the hotel, and that's where you go get your food. And it's this, like, and there's even another section with Cascade waterfalls, and it's called the Cascades because it's just running water everywhere, and they shoot water across these little things while you're eating little crumpets or whatever they eat, whether they eat at those restaurants. So we're at this hotel, which is amazing, and we go to the conference center. And the last day, we got 1,000 or so homeschool parents who are running around, and I'm in the exhibition hall, and I'm trying to wheel some stuff into the exhibition hall from my car, which is a 20-minute walk, by the way, from my car to my booth. 20 minutes of walking. And 4,000 cheerleaders had descended upon Opryland Hotel. We called it the glitter bomb, because when you walked through them to get to the homeschool area, you were covered in glitter. We lost all cell phone reception. There were so many cell phones in the building, no one could get cell phone reception at all. Like, we're not talking Wi-Fi. We could not, like, it created this, like, EMP effect. Nothing worked. So there's 4,000 cheerleaders. They are walking and stopping in the walkway. I'm hitting them. I'm bumping them. They're clumping. They're not paying attention. They're spilling coffee on me because, even 6-year-olds have their Starbucks and they're drinking coffee. And I'm a little irritated. I'm just a little bit, and I got my 8-year-old son with me. And I'm literally like holding on to him not to lose him in this mass of people. And these cheerleaders who are running everywhere. And I start to get a little mouthy, because I'm a little frustrated. Actually, there was a teenager walking in front of me. She stopped. I fell over her. Like, immediately, I'm going to get sued for harassment. I know this is what's going to happen. So I had a dolly. So I put the dolly in front of me. So I have my son. I have the dolly in front of me, because if they stop in front of me, I'll take out their ankles. Like, that was kind of my mindset. So I'm a little frustrated, just a little. I can't use the access ramps because the cheerleaders are sitting all over them. No one can use the elevators because the cheerleaders are riding them. They're not even going anywhere. They're just riding up and down. My flesh just is really not happy. And I'm telling my son, this is what I learned by counterexample. Don't be like this. I was very frustrated. We get to the table. I get set up, and I hear my son, "Oh, cheerleaders. Oh, they're the worst." And yes, Lord. So I tell my son, "Come here." I said, "I need to tell you, Daddy was wrong. I was wrong for mouthing off. I was wrong. They have as much right to be there as we do." All the other parents were there. We're very angry about the glitter bomb. That's all I saw. We have a Facebook page for that homeschool conference and the app. Everybody's like, we couldn't eat because there's only 4 or 5 restaurants, and there are literally 6,000 or 7,000 people running around. No one's getting food. But I told him, I said, we believe in the value of people, and we believe people, they have the right to be there, that, we should be kind to strangers. And here I was, I took no less than 3 ankles out with my dolly, by the way. Like, I clipped them, and I'm like, sorry, get out of my way. Because I was frustrated, right? That's how we justify. I'm frustrated. It's their fault. And what my son picked up on was, though I say, love your neighbor, I was hating those cheerleaders. And I was hating on them. And so, we say we should live lives of integrity, but then we behave another way. In the case of my son, he reflected that for me. He showed me my sour note. And immediately again, I tried to become a voice of reason and peace among the homeschool parents. And they were complaining about a variety of things. We had some homeschool high school guys who were there, and we couldn't get them out of the hallway where the cheerleaders were. They were just kind of hovering, and parents were really angry, and I get it. It's not what you expected. But and the homeschooling convention was a primarily gospel-centered Christian homeschooling group. Do we live this gospel out even in the midst of what kind of adversity are we facing? A horde of teenagers? That's really the worst thing we've got to deal with in our lives. So we say integrity is important, but first, what happens is when we break our own integrity, we justify it illegitimately. We offer some deflection, which is some sort of fallacy. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about this. The tu quoque, this is Latin. Latin is good. It's like math. It's good. It means you also. This is what we do whenever I say like I tell my wife, I love you, but you didn't do the dishes. And I'm pointing out she didn't do the dishes, and she says, well, you didn't vacuum the living room. You also did wrong. We deflect. We're just ignoring what it is we did or did not do. Or they say, but you do X, because that's what we're doing. Well, they shouldn't have been in the hallway. They shouldn't have done this. They shouldn't have been joining hands and making ranks so we couldn't get through. They really did that. So they were like phalanxing, like they were creating ranks of teenage girls that you couldn't break through. You had to go all the way around because they were tired of the adults pushing through their little groups. So we look at that, we're like, well, they shouldn't have done that. That's irrelevant to how a child of God should respond to those around them. A third, we just ignore it. We deny it. And the reason this is a Catholic connection is because many of the Catholics I've encountered, especially down south, they tend to have this mentality of, well, yeah, I believe I should be good, but whenever I'm bad, I just go to confession and we just clear it all out. Does that happen up here? I hear some giggling. So and I'm going to say that's not even a Catholic thing. I'm going to tell you, there's plenty of Baptists who do that down south too. Okay, you do something bad, I'll just throw some extra in the collection plate. That'll cover it, right? Been really bad, I'll go feed at the soup kitchen downtown. That's what we do. We just try to justify it. We're like, well, I can just ask for forgiveness. And I know this doesn't even work with my wife. That I know good and well, I just can't do whatever I willy-nilly want to and then go to her and be like, oh, I'm sorry. You look so pretty. And she's like, you will not get through this without paying through the nose. I was like, because I deserve it. Whatever I did, I deserved it most likely. We can't even do this in our human relationships. Our brothers, our sisters, our spouses, our kids. They see it and they say, no, this ought not to be this way. And so when our unbelieving friends, they claim to want something or that we should be good, and yet we see them in their behaviors lovingly being able, just like my son did. My son wasn't even trying to reflect and show me the error of my ways, but he accomplished it. And we can do that too. We can go and we can lovingly share these things. One of the ways is what I call the Nathan method. That if you're familiar with the story of Nathan and David, David had basically had a little fling with Bathsheba and didn't like the fact Bathsheba was married, so he had her husband killed. And of course, everybody knew what was going on because David was not slick about the whole thing, because when he saw Bathsheba, he basically told a bunch of servants, hey, go bring me Bathsheba. So automatically you got people who are like, okay, and you know what servants do. They're talking, they're chatting. And then he even set up the whole army. He's like, hey, when Uriah gets out there, I want all these like several hundred guys to like pull back and just leave Uriah hanging out in the front line. So it's not like people didn't know. But it seemed like the only person who was oblivious is David. And he's hanging out, what, in the throne room? He's hanging out in the palace. Nathan comes up. And what Nathan doesn't do is Nathan doesn't say, he doesn't start with, you know, you've sinned, you've done this, how dare you? Nathan comes up and he says, there were two men in a city, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. And he brought it up, and he grew up with him and his children. He used to eat of its morsels and drink from his cup and lie in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man. He was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him, but he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. Hypothetical, right? Nathan's just telling a story. But stories do that, don't they? Stories wrap us up. We get it. We get so involved. That's why we throw a popcorn at the movie screen. That's why we're like, what are you thinking? We sit there and we yell at, like, especially when you TiVo the game and the game's already over. You already know who won and lost, but you're freaking out anyway because it's not going the way you want. David's doing that. His anger is greatly kindled. He said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. And he shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing and because he had no pity. David is furious. Nathan said to David, you are that man. When we hear these sour notes, the whole concept of conversational evangelism is how can we help people hear those notes for themselves? How can we show them? If Nathan had begun that way, David would have had his defenses up. You came to the first training, we talked about with the things we want to do. We want to minimize defensiveness. We want to surface those doubts, and we want to create a desire for them to hear more. Well, that's what Nathan did. Nathan minimized the defensiveness to a story. He put those desires were burning in David, and then he allowed David, all that was surfaced, and all Nathan had to do is just draw one little connection between two little dots. So the second sour note that comes from the belief versus behavior is just say no to indoctrination. That we live in a culture that says people should not indoctrinate their children. I'm sure you hear that a lot up here. We still hear this down south. But the behavior is they create and support a system that indoctrinates children. Have you noticed that? That there's this cry in our culture that children should be free to think for themselves. So for 8 hours a day, we tell them exactly what they should think and feel. Actually, my Doctorate in Ministry seminar with Doug Potter, he was talking about how if you've ever taught, you're probably familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. Some of you who are teachers, you've heard the phrases. So you've got your cognitive, your affective, and psychomotor. That's not psychosomatic. That's something completely different. So you have the stuff you do. You have the things you think, you have the stuff you feel, and you have the stuff you do. Keep it simple. So Bloom, in an article, I think back in the 50s or 60s, actually talked about if we in the education system begin manipulating children's emotions, have we opened a Pandora's box? Because people will buy into things if they feel it, regardless of whether or not it's true. This is Bloom's himself, who is a relativist, asks the question, are we going to create an indoctrination system? And isn't that what goes on in school many times? It's not so much what's right and wrong, what do you feel about it? And moving those emotions. So when it comes to the indoctrination, the education system is not neutral. Parents should not be neutral. But what happens is people condemn Christians for teaching Christian values, yet they teach those same kids modernistic values. And so we hear this, and the reason why this is becoming more and more relevant, because every year that goes by when I teach my classes, I'll be teaching for 9 years come this August. Every time I teach, I'm looking ahead in the horizon, and I'm like, here's where we're going. And in several of my classes, we have surpassed what I saw was on the horizon. And I'm really scared to look to a new horizon, where we're going. And so we live in a world, we live in a culture where even if you've been following like the Chick-fil-A debacles, one of my friends was on Facebook, and Chick-fil-A had posted about something, and he just shared it this morning with me. He said he went to the comments, and this was just about Chick-fil-A, and everybody's like, take your hate chicken somewhere else. Like that's the new phrase, take your hate chicken. Now, Chick-fil-A is not a Christian business. It's a business that's owned by Christians. And that alone is enough to get it kicked out of various avenues. Do you understand where we're going? I think it was Yale also pulled all the funding for all the Christian groups because in the name of diversity. Do you hear the sour note? Do you hear that? Do you hear how we believe in diversity except for you? We believe in diversity as long as you think just like us. I mean, it's a cacophony of sour notes in our culture, and it's to use a math example, an exponential curve starts out really slow, and then it goes up really, really fast. Well, right now we're on that really, really fast part, going up in terms of the insanity in our world. So when we hear these things, we need to be able to engage them. One more. Let's building bridges with this. One of the things we can do is we tell people when it comes to the reason why we train our children is there are truths we want to pass on. The world understands this. The world wants to pass on truths, so they're willing to do that however. Capture the kids, get them in the environment, teach them when they're young. Actually, Wells Fargo's just did this. Wells Fargo, the bank, I don't know if you'll have Wells Fargo up here. Is that up here? Okay. So I don't even know what they did. I just heard there was a debacle recently, or something happened with Wells Fargo that customers lost faith in them. So what they started doing is they started giving like handbags and toys out at elementary schools to kids. That Wells Fargo's idea is literally, let's weather the storm of all these adults, and we're going to raise up a new generation of customers. Smart. That's exactly, train up a child in the way they should go, and they will not depart from it. That works whether you train them in Scripture or you train them in the anti-Scripture. There's certain truths we want to pass on. Those truths are either opinions and they don't matter, like I don't try to convince kids that they should eat tacos. False and they're wrong, that if kids say, I'll never use math, that's false. We use math all the time, or you benefit from math constantly, but that's another topic for another day. It's true, and the next generation needs to receive that information. That's why we want to pass this on. This is why when the world looks at us and says, how dare you pass on your Christian values to kids? We're like, do you hear what you're saying? Like we tell the world, like that's exactly what every parent does, is pass on. That's what parents are supposed to do. If parents aren't passing on values, what are you doing? How are you raising them up? So one more, like I said, we'll go to break. The forgiveness issue. Belief, preaching that people should forgive people, but the behavior is practicing grudges against people. So in understanding the note, if you think of the context, and this happens with church folk all the time. This happens with us where we say, we're supposed to forgive, but yet we do not. The world claims forgiveness is divine, but they also reject God. Listen to those notes. Listen to them clang against each other. But forgiveness, like medicine, is a practice. So this is why when people say, we should forgive, but sometimes we have to practice that. We don't always get it right. And then again, what's your motivation for forgiveness? Because what the world says, we should forgive, and you ask why. Why in a godless world should you forgive? This is one of those, you say you should forgive, but you also don't practice forgiveness. You say you want diversity and everybody gets the right to believe what they want to, but you don't practice it. You say that we should have freedom, but yet you want to take those away. We say in the church, forgive, but yet, where is it not the church the first places you find those grudges? I remember when I have a college minister who, because of an indiscretion, just leave it at that, he was not welcome at church. His little girl was playing baby Jesus in the Christmas pageant. He wanted to see his baby girl play Jesus in the Christmas pageant. So he, another guy, and I met him at church in the parking lot. We stood on both sides of him. And we were literally his bodyguard as we went into church. And when we went up to the balcony, anyone who came in, we're like, stay back. Literally, we had to form a bubble around him and protect him just so that he could watch the Christmas pageant and see his little girl. You with me? The world can hear our sour notes. And what we shouldn't do is, just like I said, well, the world has sour notes too. Irrelevant. We cannot, in these cases, like with the issues of forgiveness and some of these sour notes, go to our non-believing friends and help them see those sour notes when our sour notes are just as loud, just as clangy, and just as distracting. So what we do is we tell people we need forgiveness from sins, not just each other. This is why forgiveness is so important. We need forgiveness from sins. And again, give personal stories of when you encounter forgiveness or when you've dealt with these kinds of things. That this is the power of testimony, to be able to say, here's how I was wrong and here's how I forgave. Those are what stir our heart to realize there's something about that. You say, I want to be that. I want to have that. That's why when we go to the movies, that's why you want to be Ant-Man. That's why you want to be Superman. Okay? Or better yet, that's why you want to be Batman. If you have any choices, always be Batman. Can't be wrong, can't go wrong. That's why you want to be those things. Like, I want that. I want not just the power, but I want just, the things that come with it. I want to be that person. And I think what the world needs to hear from us, the world needs to look at us and say, we don't understand your God, but we really like who you are. Man, would that not build a bridge to those who do not know Jesus? Have you considered how people act when they are forgiven much? Jesus gives us the story of the lady who was forgiven much. She cries, wipes Jesus' feet with her tears and her hair, and he's like, she's been forgiven. She knows. When you've been forgiven so much, you know. We as believers have been forgiven much. So we have to show the world what being forgiven looks like, so that we can tell the world, you just don't need to just forgive and be nice to people. Like, you need a forgiveness that comes from God himself. And on that, we're going to take a break for 5 minutes. You've been really good. I want to give you just a 5-minute break to kind of get up, move around. I know it's still kind of early in the morning. You've sat still. You've been great. Take a couple of moments. Get up, use the restroom, those kinds of things. Get the blood working. We'll be back in 5.
And just a reminder, if you want these PowerPoints, you can sign up downstairs and we'll send them to you. They're very useful. So see you in 5 minutes.